What It Takes Radio Company welcomes you to another edition of Interesting Ideas. And we continue. It is time to welcome you into the transformation zone. And we have a very special program today, so stay with us because here's what we're going to do. I want to tell you a story of a woman who has gone through many transformations in her life and what she has learned, and indeed, what she can teach us. Let's listen to Deborah and find out what her story is. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Transformation Zone. And it's my privilege and my pleasure to work with you as I'm working with my friend Joe Pine, the author of The Experience Economy, which has changed a lot of people's business models. And right now he's writing a book which he said, now we need to focus on people who actually have gone through transformations in their life. Now, not just little changes. Certainly they can be, but changes where they actually have been, in many cases, transformed in who they are or what they do. And he's asked me to catch some stories of people like that. And I thought a lot about it. And we have many, many wonderful stories. But I said, you know what? My good friend, and I was a mentor to her and she to me, Deborah Newman, actually fits the definition. And I think we'll find out why today. So, Deborah, you're a person of transformation. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Never been called that before.
Well, I'm not so sure it's an honor, but it can be, Well, and I came up with a title because I know your story somewhat, and the old kind of make it a little bit mysterious. And I said, well, my friend Deborah, we can start her story. She goes from spam to slam, and so it's your turn in your town, and you're on. And you were Deborah Camponi from Chicago. Start there.
Okay. So I went to college in the 70s. And at that time, women could be, or were led to believe that we could be, a nurse, a teacher, or a secretary.
That's it. The big three.
And I actually have found some notes that my mother kept of even a grammar school teacher sending home a note to my mother saying, apparently science is not one of Deborah's favorite topics. And that was an early indication that nursing was probably not going to be one of the tracks that I would follow. Because she was absolutely right. Science was not a favorite of mine. And as it turns out, I look back and I'm not sure I had a favorite thing in school, not really fond of school that much. Then I could be a teacher. So I went to Northern Illinois University. I followed in my brother's footsteps, pretty much what led me there. And they were a teaching school. And I thought, all right, I'll be a teacher. And I had done a lot of sewing and home ec kind of things. And I thought, I'll major in home ec and then, become a teacher. Well, one semester into that, and it was evident that that also was not going to be my future. I grew up with two parents that were only children. So I had no aunts or uncles, no nieces and nephews, no cousins, virtually like surrounded by just our little family. And so I didn't have a lot of experience around kids, and I discovered I was apparently not real fond of kids either. So I thought, well, teaching is not the role for me. So then during the summers, I did I went to a little secretarial school in the summer and learned how to take shorthand and type and so forth. But in Northern Illinois, that was not a major, so I had to find something that I could do. And turns out that business and marketing was probably the only thing left. And so that's the direction I went. and got a degree in a Bachelor of Science, which I think is very ironic because I only had to take one science class to graduate. But it's a Bachelor of Science in Marketing, and I um, graduated in 75, I think, and I had an opportunity to interview before I left. I went on an exchange program to Stockholm, Sweden, through an organization called ISEC, Association of International and Economic Students, something like that, where we would find opportunities for kids from all over the world to come to Chicago and have little interns, and then in turn we were able to go. So I was able to go to Stockholm. Before I left, I asked my sales professor, I said, I'd like to interview with Hormel. And he said, oh, no, Hormel doesn't hire women for sales. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went to Europe, did my thing over there for 6 months, came back. And in February of the following year, I went back to the university, and because that's where the companies would come and interview kids. And it was turns out that food sales was probably the direction I was going to go in. And Hormel, in fact, had to hire women because some affirmative action laws had just gone into being. The Jane Fonda and that group with the burning the bras and all of that had allowed for women to have more opportunity. And one of the things was that Hormel was no longer able to say we don't hire women. And in fact, obviously, they were very interested in hiring women. So I was there was two of us that were hired right about the same time. So I've claimed for many years that I was the first female ever hired by Hormel. There was another woman hired right before me, but she quit after 3 months. So,
And
so
it's
I claim the title as the first
it's
female.
hard to believe people, when you tell people stories like this, they said, really? Was it like my wife, Karen, finally, J.C. Penney said, why don't you apply to be a manager? And that was, wow, because J.C. Penney Company never hired women managers.
Right. Yeah.
In our lifetime, right?
It was a given. And if it wasn't for those strong women in those times that were fighting for us, some of the rest of us, like myself, probably would have just, okay, I'll do whatever else is available. So I went and interviewed with Hormel, was hired by Hormel, and then soon discovered I started in Chicago and I learned a few lessons there, which I don't think they're kind of funny, but may not be appropriate for this. But then they transferred me to Minnesota. And one of the things about Hormel is if you wanted to move up in the ranks with Hormel, you had to be transferred. That was their deal. They never let people stay in one place very long because they didn't want you to get comfortable. They wanted to keep moving you. And so I was transferred to Minnesota and had a territory in the Twin Cities and then up into northern Minnesota. And yes, I was selling Spam, Spam and Hormel chili and Dinty Moore beef stew and corned beef hash and pig's feet and yeah. So
and you did it well.
Yeah. It was I enjoyed it. It was a good job for me. And then I met Scott. My husband was assistant manager of a grocery store that I called on. We became good friends and started dating. And then he asked me to marry him. And I knew that he was never going to leave Minnesota. So I had to leave Hormel. I knew I had to leave Hormel because the only way to advance was to transfer. And he was not going to allow me to transfer. So I left Hormel. And I'm glad I did because then it it became, the changes in my life that have led me to where I am today. Um, I asked my stepdad. I was always interested in numbers and did well when I took the accounting classes and so forth and statistics. And I thought, well, maybe I could work at a bank. And he had a financial advisor, and I asked him if I could talk to him. Anyway, it turns out he was in the insurance business, naturally, and he recommended that I interview with Connecticut General, which I did. And of course, they wanted to have women. Oh wow, a woman insurance agent. Wow, that would be unique as well. So I started there. And I will tell you, Stan, when you talk about this whole transformation thing, when I was in high school, I was a pom pom girl because, again, there wasn't any sports, and I wasn't good at
Right.
sports anyway. So I ended up as pom pom girl, but I was so shy that I was really ostracized in that group because they were the in crowd, but I wasn't. My friends were the shyest kids in school, and in fact, when they um, at the yearbook, they had the shyest girl in high school, and I kind of thought it might be me, but it was my best friend. And
One of the
so
shy, she was the other shy guy.
yeah, she was the
Yeah.
other shy girl. So we were um, ostracized, quite frankly, because we were so shy and never in the in crowd. Um, and being part of a group like that, being a pom pom girl, but not being in the in crowd, was very painful. I used to come home, and I remember sitting on the living room floor with my legs crossed, playing solitaire, and have a box of Kleenex next to me, and sat there and cried while I played solitaire every afternoon after I came home from pom pom practice. But I persevered and I stayed in it for 3 years, and uh, had
Yeah.
an opportunity to do something like that. But it was high school was not a very aspirational place for me. And as I
Mhm.
recall, I think I was really a very solid C student. Um, which,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, so there was no path that was like naturally opening up for me.
That's right.
So sales tended to be the path of, where you end
Yet
up
we
if you
don't
can't
we
do
don't
anything
think
else.
of salespeople as being shy.
No,
So that
exactly. And so I think that was probably so ideal for me because one of the things I did do when I was at Hormel was I took Dale Carnegie.
right. Okay.
They
Sure.
uh, promoted those kinds of things, and so I took Dale Carnegie and read all of those wonderful books, how to meet people and influence people. How the
Uh, that is still after 80 some years a bestseller, and
oh wow,
it's still great stuff.
yeah. And then the gentleman that wrote the book about being in the concentration camp,
Oh, Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl's book, all of those books that were actually kind of transformational when you
Yes. Yes.
know
Very
what
much
their
so.
messages are. And so I learned a tremendous amount through opening myself up to those kinds of things. So after the Hormel journey and after getting married, then the next step was Connecticut General, which was horrifying.
Mm.
Blah. It was every Thursday. I did not have a natural market. When you're in the insurance, they kind of look for people that have a natural market
Right.
that they can call their friends or whatever. Well, I wasn't from Minnesota. I was from Chicago. I didn't have a family because my family was no family. And
You
so,
didn't have 100 friends to make enemies by asking them
right.
for it.
So I cold called, and with Connecticut General, they wanted us to call on business owners. Well, a 25-year-old, I think at that time, young girl calling on successful business owners. I think the only way that I ever got appointments was people that, again, were curious about, oh, some girl's going to come here and talk to me. And So I did that for a year. I did manage to live through a year of that. We had a cold call every Thursday, make 100 phone calls to get 10 appointments. You would have the 10 appointments, you would get 3 people to open up an opportunity for you, and then you would make 1 sale out of that. So it wouldn't happen, I mean, it would be, you'd feed in the 100, you get 10, you get 3, you get 1. And that just through a funnel, I mean,
Yes.
if even no matter how horrible you were, 1% of those 100 was probably going to buy something from you. So that is how I, if you will, suffered through the first year of my career in the insurance business. And then I went to Northwestern National, which was a very embracing, wonderful, more family oriented kind of place. And I discovered that calling on younger families and so forth was a little bit better opportunity for me. So I did kind of the traditional life insurance sales um, with helping families make decisions about life insurance and disability insurance. And one of the things that happened there, when I came from Connecticut General, I had a bunch of business that was in the pipeline, and I knew I was going to be making this change. So I waited until the first month that I was with this next company, and I put all of that business in 1 month. And little did I know, it was the most coveted contest of the year. It was called the President's Club, and it was to go to Saskatchewan, Canada, for a week. What kind of fish were we fishing for? Well, anyway, fishing trip. Walleye fishing.
For sure.
Fly in on a little float plane, get to the place, and they gave you rain gear to wear because you sat on a boat for 8 hours and fished. And as you might guess, a woman had never qualified for this before. So they ended up
Another transformation.
yeah, it was 2 of us. So I don't know which one of us really qualified, and then they had to find another one. I don't know. I doubt that we both legitimately qualified, but there was 2 of us. And so we got to share a cabin and go fishing. And every night you could go to the lodge and drink whiskey, play cards, and smoke cigars. And so she and I stayed back in our cabin and read books. So that was, and sadly, I will say sadly, they never did that trip again. It was the most coveted trip of all the agents until the 2 women qualified. So
you killed another old guys club, right?
Exactly. Yes. So I kept managing to do things like that. And then I joined a financial planning firm that was doing investment planning for people, and I fit the role of the insurance person in their firm. And that was a very wonderful spot for me, and those were wonderful people. We did good work for people. And it was at that time that I discovered this need for what was then nursing home insurance. And people started asking, well, what happens if we go in a nursing home? What, do you have to give your money away? Do you have to spend it all? What happens? Because they heard all these stories. So I decided, well, I don't know, but I'll find out. So I started investigating, and I discovered that, yes, if you wanted to qualify for Medicaid or welfare, yeah, you have to give away all your money and you have to be destitute, and then you qualify, but then you don't have choice as to care that you really would want for yourself. So I thought, well, there must be a better solution to this. So I started investigating and discovered right about that time that there had been a category of insurance called nursing home insurance, but it was morphing into nursing home, but they had the ability for you to put a rider on, which would pay for home health care. And
Sure.
so my parents were really the first ones that I investigated a solution for. And in so doing, I discovered that that was a place where I could develop some expertise. And um, after our third, was I pregnant with Daniel? Yes. I was pregnant with Daniel, my third child. And by the way, I remember also, I'll tell you one other cute story. When I was in the life business by myself. No, it was after this point. So hold on, I'll get to that.
Okay.
So the firm had invested in some real estate that didn't work out, and so while I was home on maternity leave, they came to the house and said that they had disbanded the company. And so I was like, "Oh." So I was unemployed. At the same time, we had a new baby. We had just bought a new home that needed a tremendous amount of work. It was a fixer-upper, and Scott had been working for his brother, and I won't go into those details, but he also parted ways with his brother. So Scott was not working. I was not working. We had a third child, brand new baby, and brand new house. And I was like, oh, okay. So I guess I am going to start over again.
One
And
of the things they oftentimes say in the hero's journey is you have to suffer.
right. And this was literally starting over again. And I thought, I can't tell you how many times, Dan, I thought, oh, I wonder if I could get a job at the post office where I would get a paycheck
Right.
and come home. But then I thought, well, who would hire me? Because I can't sit still long enough to do a job at a desk or something. And so I thought, oh, I have to go back and start over in the insurance business. So I got a little office and I hired a good I had enough money coming in from old renewals that I could hire a good friend of mine who could do administrative work for me. And the two of us shared one desk, one phone, one computer, two chairs, and I started over. And it was at that time that I made the decision that I did not want the responsibility for people's retirement incomes. I did not want there to be a market crash, and I didn't warn people or I didn't tell people whatever they needed to do to avoid it and that they would be financially devastated. I thought I cannot bear that
Mm.
burden. And so I went right back to insurance, which I always felt comfortable because it did just the opposite. It provided protection. So at this time, if you can imagine being in the insurance business, particularly the life insurance business, that if you want to see people, you have to see them at night, and the life insurance it's a very very tough business. Holy moly, Rocky! It's one of those things. I often thought if you were sitting next to somebody in an airplane and you did not want to talk to them during the flight, all you had to do is look them in the eye and tell them that you sell insurance. And I will assure you, they are not going to engage you in a conversation for the rest of the flight.
In fact, a mutual friend of ours, Mark Johnson, said that's exactly what he would do if he
Yeah,
wanted.
yeah. And so, but as a result, you can well imagine that that's your living. No one wants to talk to you. Uh,
That's right.
and of course, I mean, you're just like the plague if you're at any party or anything. They see you coming, and it's like because everybody was a prospect.
Right. Yeah.
You
Right.
know?
That's what
And
they
so,
told you.
yeah, I mean, and so I did a very thorough research about what category of insurance could I do during the daytime and that had really strong renewals and for income. And there's a few. I mean, you could do health insurance, you could do disability insurance, and long-term care was the other one. And so I decided that I would focus on long-term care insurance. And another good friend told me, he says, Deb, if you want to focus on something like that, you need to become the expert in the state on the topic so that you can attract business. And at the same time, Stan, I don't know if you know this, but I was also very wisely um, moving through the chairs, if you will, of the professional associations within the insurance business.
Mhm.
I found that I needed to have a home where there was kindred spirits. You know, you're by yourself. When you shut that door, there is nobody knows what you're doing. Nobody cares what you're doing. Nobody's encouraging you. Nothing. I mean, oh, and you go home and, you know, your spouse, did you earn any money today? You know, I mean, it's like, oh my God. So the professional association, which at that time was called the National Association of Life Underwriters, now it's called
Yeah.
Financial Associates anyway. I was going through the chairs and I volunteered there. And so one of the things I was in charge of was speakers. And somebody had suggested I talk to you
That's right.
about being a speaker at a NAFA meeting. And you and I sat down and you started telling me about goal setting. And I had never done goal setting and I didn't really know anything about goal setting. And you literally, I wrote a book about stories about
Yeah.
my life. And in there is a chapter about having a coach and what you did for me. And it started with the story about the 3%.
Right. I remember.
And that's
That's
another,
still a part of the deal, right?
yeah. So it was, you know, that they did this Harvard study and determined that they studied for decades afterwards, and the 3% that had faithfully written goals and
Yes.
measurable goals and attainable goals, decades later owned 80% of the wealth of the
Right.
group. And so I understood how important that was. And to this day, even in my retirement, I could show you right now in front of me is my vision board
Right.
and my goals and my values. And literally, it's all right in front of me.
I remember
And
the statement where you said to me, I want to be one of the three.
yeah. And so I have become one of the 3%,
That's
Stan.
right. You have.
And that was also very transformational because I learned from you how to do that.
Okay.
And starting over again. And so I decided to focus on long-term care insurance, but how would I do that? So I took every class that was available on long-term care insurance, and there kept being this one woman who was teaching them all. Her name was Carly Dunkelberger, of all the names in the world. Anyway, and then, but she worked for um, a company that did teaching in classes, and they told her that they did not appreciate her doing all of these CE classes for all these other organizations where her company was not getting paid for her
Sure.
doing the teaching because she worked for them. And so they told her she couldn't do these pro bono presentations anymore. And I don't know if she reached out to me or I reached out to her, but I ended up taking that role over and started teaching everyone that would listen about long-term care insurance. And it was professionals. I taught classes for financial planners, for insurance professionals, for property casualty professionals, for real estate professionals, anybody. I would talk about long-term care insurance and planning and the need for it and so forth. And then I was also invited to consumer groups. And, you know, I remember telling you this as well, that I would, you know, go out at 8 o'clock at night to some church basement,
Right.
you know, 50 miles away.
In Minnesota in the winter.
Yes, and do some little seminar on, you know, long-term care planning and nursing home planning and what it was and why it was important. And I would come home, you know, we had 3 kids, no income fixed, you know. Scott had taken a job back in the grocery business again. So he had our rock, you know, income
Sure.
and insurance while I was totally self-employed. And he would say, "What, did you get paid?" And I'm like, "No." but I'm sure that it will pay off in the end. And it did. And people used to accuse me. In fact, I had one guy, I'll tell you a story because it came out of this. So I did a seminar, and this woman was there. And I remember it was husband and wife. They didn't get along real well, didn't agree on much. She made spectacularly beautiful quilts, so I was attracted to her, and liked her anyway. She says, "Will you come and help me make a decision about long-term care insurance?" So I was like, "Oh, of course." So I go to meet her and her husband, and I sell them that day, very day, long-term care insurance, which you usually don't do, but she was very motivated, which happened in a second, you'll understand. So then the husband calls me later that night after I just left there, and he said, "I have to tell you, I already bought long-term care insurance from another agent from the same company that you just sold it to me. And because I finally gave up on my wife because she was never going to buy it, she wouldn't see this guy. And so I bought it already, and now you sold me the same thing, so I have to tell you." And so I knew the agent, and I called him. I said, "Why don't we just split this so that these people are not put in the
Yeah.
middle of it?" And he said, "Oh, no, you don't." He said, "You don't deserve that business. I've been calling them for months and leaving messages and calling, and it just fell into your lap." And I thought, "Ah, he's right. It did fall into my lap." But that's what started happening. All this business started falling into my lap, not because I was sitting doing nothing, but because I would do as many as 5 presentations a week. It was nonstop and never got paid for any of it, but people just started sending me clients because they would encounter somebody that wanted to talk about, "Oh, I know that long-term care lady."
Well, one of the things about that is, like my book, is that they bought you first, and they didn't buy the other guy. She didn't buy the other guy at all.
Right. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. It was, yeah, it was miraculous. And I remember you saying that whenever we would have a meeting at the office where we were away from the phones, we would go back to the office, and the phones there was like 10 messages of people wanting us to help with long-term care. And so I quickly discovered that I thought, these other agents that are referring me business are soon going to discover that they don't need Deb Newman to do this, that they can do it themselves. And so I thought, I better figure out a way to still have these relationships, but where they can write the business. So there was, in the insurance business, there's many layers of how it's distributed. And there's something called a general agent. So a general agent gets a contract with an insurance company, but has to promise that they will write a certain amount of premium. And it was usually 200,000 or 300,000, maybe even $500,000 worth of premium with that company. And your job then was to go out and find agents that would sell the insurance underneath your general agency. And so that's what I began.
An
And I
incredible
started,
transformation. Your
yeah,
own, you're now your own business.
right. So it's not just Deb Newman anymore. It's now Newman Long-Term Care,
Right.
and start attracting business where we can train other people to do it. And that goes back to building a business that has value. If it's you that has responsibility to do every transaction, then that business is not worth anything without you.
Right.
Like I look at somebody that cuts hair, or uh, somebody that paints houses or whatever. I mean, if they're not painting the houses, then they're not making any money.
Right.
And so you have to create a business that can generate its own income without you having to be the one
Right.
doing everything. And so I also discovered,
And you're a woman.
and I'm a woman, and at that time, you are so right about that. Oh my goodness. But I was oblivious to it.
Yeah.
I never allowed it to be a barrier because I wasn't aware it was happening.
That's true. That's right.
Occasionally I would be, but I wouldn't allow it to get in my way. But I discovered that there were people that liked to do things that I didn't like to do. I didn't even know that. I thought, how is it possible that there are people that want to fill forms out? And oh my God,
Yeah.
I couldn't stand filling forms out, and I wasn't any good at it. And I discovered that I could hire people that liked to do that.
One of
And
my statements has been is one of the proofs of the existence of God is that there are people who love to do what I hate. Find
yeah,
them.
and another Stanism is that you told me early on, I didn't know what it meant until many years later, to delegate my weaknesses.
Hmm.
And I thought, I don't even know what that means, but that's what it meant. Find somebody to do all that stuff that I didn't want to do so that I could do what I was good at.
Delegate everything but your genius if you can.
Yes. And, when you just say that, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, fine. But you don't realize what that really means until you are stuck doing stuff that is so burdensome that you'll never grow. And then I read another book called it's the pie story, the lady that made the pies, the
Yes. The entrepreneurial myth.
entrepreneurial myth. And oh my God, so I had a woman that worked for me, this woman that I had hired, this one woman who stuck with me all those years, and she helped me build my business and become successful. But then I discovered she was the one who was holding me back because she wouldn't let go of anything. And we needed to hire people, and she wouldn't let go of anything. And when I read that book, The Entrepreneurial Myth, I was like, I have to let her go because she's the one that's holding back the ability for my business to grow.
That's right.
And that was just heartbreaking. We're today still good friends because she found another opportunity. But I have learned so much back to the day when Hormel asked me to go take Dale Carnegie, to NAFA bringing in speakers, to you coming into my life and guiding me along the way. I have learned so much, which has allowed me to create this path. And so I just kept doing long-term care insurance blindly, head down, company after company coming into my life. I will tell you another story, that there was a thing called the Long-Term Care Network. And it was a network of other insurance agencies like mine across the country. And they collectively negotiated with insurance companies to get higher contracts, because then they could promise $1 million premium or whatever it might be, so that we could get paid out higher and stuff. Well, I found out that I had been blackballed from this organization. Another one of those, it's like, why? And I later found out who did it and why he did it. And it was because he tried to get me to go under him for one of the insurance companies, and I didn't do it. I wanted to go direct. And so he blackballed me from this organization. And I saw other people around me getting in, and I'm like, what the heck? And so eventually, and of course there was all men, there was no women, anyway, eventually I got in, and that was a good place to be. But that was one of those things. And then the story I was going to tell about the men in the business. So I was on one of the company's travelers producers council. There was 9 agents in the entire nation on this producer council, and of course there were no women. Never had been any women ever. And I was the first woman. They plucked me out. Oh, look, here's we got to find a woman. Oh, wait, here's one doing something. Put her on there. And again, I'll tell you a story about how you coached me. But so I'm at one of these meetings, and there's a guy, Hal. His name was Hal, and he brought a deck of pictures of his 2 beautiful daughters that they had had by in vitro fertilization. So he was sure that they picked out the best eggs and that they had these like superhumans as their children. And he's showing me all these pictures, and he says, "Deb, you should do this. You should have some kids." And I looked at him and I said, "I already do. I have 3 kids." And he looked at me, and this was one of the proudest moments in the insurance business of me. He could not believe that I had reached the place that I had reached in my business and had done it while raising 3 kids.
That's right.
And never missing a hockey game or anything else. That was one of the beautiful things about the insurance business. You could make your plans around your family. And so that was one of those moments.
Right.
But at that same council, I was following in the evening. They would go out drinking and doing more than that. I don't want to tell you. And so we'd had this dinner, and then they were all traipsing along on the street to go to the cigar bar, where they're going to drink whiskey and smoke cigars. And I, of course, am traipsing along behind them alone. No one wants to be with me. Alone. And one of them turns around and looks at me as if to say, "Oh my God, she's coming with us." And I saw the look, and I thought, they don't want me there. I don't want to be there. I'm going to go back to my room, read a book, and not go with them. And you had told me before going to this meeting that don't say anything unless you are prepared to say something very meaningful, and let them know that you are to be listened to seriously when you speak. And so what I did, I was the person there that was representing the category of long-term care insurance, because the travelers had all these categories of insurance. And when it got time to talk about that, I stood up, and I had rehearsed that night in the hotel room exactly what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. And they all looked at me like, uh-oh. She is somebody that needs to be paid attention to. And that was one of my little victories along the way, of, again, knocking down those traditions that had been in place for decades in the insurance business.
I've oftentimes described you. I said, women oftentimes want to break the glass ceiling and work their way up. I said, let me introduce you to someone who understood you break the glass walls.
Right. Yeah. We talked about writing a book at one time about breaking the glass walls.
Oh, right.
But yeah, I never took the time
You just
to
did
write
it.
the book. I just did it.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so I and I know to this day that, I don't meant to talk about this particular thing, but that I probably make more money than any of those people do,
Right.
or did, in my career, and still to this day.
And then finally you decide to do something else, and eventually you've created a company of value, and we make another transformation, and then we make another transformation.
I built this business for over 30 years, and it became one of the largest distributors of long-term care insurance in the United States. And I would wake up in the middle of the night, like, how do I get out of this? How how do I end this? Because I could just quit. And the renewals on this block, remember I talked about
Yeah.
renewals. That was the reason that I
That was the reason. That was the
chose this
reason.
category of insurance. But I had 19 employees and I thought, I can't just stop. How do I get off this treadmill? And I felt like the treadmill was somebody else was in control of the treadmill, and they kept raising the height.
That's right.
And I was just like, oh, I want to get off the treadmill. How do I get off of this thing? And all the other people that I knew that were selling my kind of business were selling it um, to organizations that just were buying the renewals. They were giving you a multiple of the renewals, and then the business would disappear.
Yeah.
I would have the cash, they would have the renewals, and all my employees would be unemployed. That's like the worst scenario. I might as well just keep the renewals and shut the door, but then I'd still have all these employees, and I was like, so in my lap again comes a gentleman who said, would you distribute our product? It was a company that had never distributed their product beyond their career agents. And there was a reason for it. It was a fraternal. It was a company called Thrivent that had career agents, and you had to be a Christian to buy their products. And so it was very difficult to imagine distributing it to the general population through independent agents. And of course I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I engaged my team, and everybody's all in. I had the most talented team that, again, knocked down every obstacle you can imagine to get this company that never knew how to distribute its product, license people, do anything outside of the career agency, to us doing it independently. And anyway, 2 years later, then he approached me and he said, I remember we were at a restaurant, we were having breakfast, and one of my best friends now, he said to me, would you consider selling your agency to us? This is a Fortune 300 company.
Yeah.
And I decided to, rather than to jump into his lap and say yes, to play coy a little bit, well, I'll consider that. Anyway, of course, I wanted to do that because then they literally wanted the business for the sake of the business and to continue to grow it. And so that is what I did. I sold my business to this Fortune 300 insurance company, phenomenal, high value, Christian based company, that to this day, now 9 years later, the business is still thriving, and they allowed us to run it independently. They still allow this company, this little Newman Long-Term Care, to be inside their company, run independently. And so I was able to exit,
Right.
and allow my employees to still grow and continue leading.
Win, 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 win.
Win, 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 win. And the best day ever to have created something from nothing, grew it to one of the largest companies in the country of its kind, sell it, and still have it continue and thrive. And the company is called Thrivent, which I love because it's a company that it's still allowing my little company to thrive within its walls. So, yes, I was then like footloose and fancy free, but again, I'm still this crazy goal-driven person that has vision.
Still a 3%er.
Yes. So I'm like, now what do I do? Well, what I discovered, somebody gave me the best advice ever for retiring, a jewel of a piece of wisdom. It was, pretend as if it's a sabbatical. And so many years in the past, when I was on that treadmill and couldn't even take a 2-week vacation, I was like, I thought, all these people that by their own means or not become unemployed, but, or that do take a respite or whatever, a change in career, whatever it is. I was like, oh, how nice it would be to literally just be free of this for some period of time. So I thought, oh, I'm gonna take that advice. Pretend it's just a sabbatical. What would I do if I had a year off
Mhm.
to do whatever's important to me? And so I decided that I would transform my health, and so I went on that path, and I am now a health fanatic in every way. Work out every single day, and or 6 days a week, and I play pickleball, I golf, I'm do all the right things
You
to.
slammed, like I said, you slammed the health game.
Right, I did. I took all the tests that I could to make sure I knew where I was on every
Okay.
level, and so I did that during this year, and then also made the decision. Scott and I made the decision that we wanted to start living generously. I had grown up understanding that you were supposed to give away 10% of your income,
Mhm.
and I come to find out that's not very common. But
That's correct.
uh, so Scott and I set up a custodial account, to charitable account to be able to do that, donor advised fund,
Mhm.
and we're going to put $100,000 a year into that fund and give it away. And so we started down that road, and shortly after, just 1 year after retirement, our first grandchild was born with cystic fibrosis.
There we go.
And so that journey began. And
As I say, sometimes God is like Gomer Pyle. He says, "Surprise, surprise, surprise,"
yeah, and
and
only
you're
gives
not sure
you,
if that's a good surprise or not.
yeah, only gives you what you can
Yeah.
handle. But so, of course, we get engaged with it. My son, over the top leader, um, started. We went to the gala. I told the kids they could each bet on something up to $5,000. We became like, who are these people? Um, and now again, here we are years later. We have 7 tables of people that we bring to this thing. We do a yard party every year called the Bailey Bash. We raise $40,000 a year doing that. I get on the board, and then they're in a campaign to raise $50 million, $250 million, and my son puts me in charge of. He becomes the president of the chapter in
Mhm.
Minnesota, North Dakota, and he puts me in charge of large donors. And I'm like, how do you do this? I don't know anybody that has great wealth and knows even what cystic fibrosis is. And when I retired, I discovered at the University of Minnesota, you could take classes for free if you're over 64 and you're a resident of Minnesota. So I had been studying Italian. I've done that for years, kind of one of my goals. That's always there. And I had taken 5 classes at the university, Italian, and exhausted their classes actually. And and I thought, well, there must be a class on how to raise money for nonprofits, right? I mean, it's a big
Mhm.
university. So I called the one stop office and said, help me find a class. And at any rate, there was a graduate level class that was called fundraising for, I have a textbook here somewhere, fundraising for nonprofits. And I thought, okay, I'm in. And but I discovered that you couldn't audit it. I would audit these other classes
Yeah.
because then you don't have to. But I always did the homework. But nonetheless, I couldn't audit this one. I had to take it for a grade, and it's a graduate level class at the Carlson School of Management at the Humphrey Institute, and there's only 8 students. And I convinced myself, it's okay, Deb. If you get a D, it doesn't matter. No one will ever know you. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't
Well,
matter anymore.
it, but it did matter because there was only 8 of us, and we were on 2 teams of 4. I was like, I'm on some team, and I have to do the work and help lift these kids, So that's another funny story. But at any rate, one of the speakers that came in was a guy by the name of Mort Nauman, who was involved with every Jewish fundraising event in Minnesota. This guy, that's what he did. He knew everybody. And he said, I enjoyed him the most because he was old fashioned kind of sales guy. He said, whenever he was getting shut down by somebody and, he couldn't get them to give, he would say to them, only 1% of all the people in the world are Jewish. And if we don't give to our own causes, who do you think's going to? And I was like, oh, yeah, that's powerful. And I don't know how anybody could say no to this guy. And so I internalized that. And then I realized, oh my gosh, there's only, at the time I was taking the class, there's 30,000 people in the United States with cystic fibrosis. And I couldn't get my calculator to divide 30,000 into 300 million. I was like, what is the number? What is that percentage? And then, it came out as like 1/10 of 1%. I said, that's not even possible. How's that possible? But that's what it is. It's 1/10 of 1% of the population of the United States have cystic fibrosis. 1/10 of 1%. And if we don't give, who's going to give?
That's right.
So Scott and I made the decision to give $1 million. And so that has started us on this journey. Now I'm actually now in the middle of another campaign I made a commitment to raise $1 million. And so that's the latest in my journey of where my passion is and where I still devote my goal setting and capacity to continue to lead a meaningful life.
And that's truly from spam to slam.
Right. And more to come.
It's more to come. This has been delightful. You and I have had many experiences together. In fact, now we are both in the experience of finding out that we have a grandchild who has special needs, and it is a genetic disease. And so that has transformed our lives in awareness, and that's what we do now. That's
right. Exactly. Yeah. Right.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Stan. And thank you for having been part of my success over the years. I devoted a chapter in my little book to you.
Well, very good.
Because of how meaningful those coaching sessions were to me. So thank you.
And as I say, part of the advantage of it is oftentimes I got paid and I learned as much from my clients as the value that I gave. And you were certainly part of that experience too.
Well, thank you. Yep.
Good. Best and blessings to us all. And those of you, we'd love to hear your story. And by the way, just as Deb would say, well, do I really have a story? Well, when she finally figures it out, every one of us has a story somewhere. And we have some victory to share and some suffering to perhaps overcome. And everybody can be encouraged because telling your story is one of the most effective and powerful means of communication. And you proved me right on that again. Best and blessings to you and your family. And of course, to that wonderful grandchild that we're trying to remember. The goal is, I love it, pure found.
Right.
Pure found. That would be great. Best and blessings.
Thank you.